Hello, this is Heather from Gippsland in Churchill, and I would like to talk today about thinking frameworks and supporting communication of thinking. I'd like to share some experiences about a whole school approach to make thinking visible. We would like all our students to be thinkers. That's why we're here today. Now, this book here has 42 different frameworks for thinking, and today I'm just going to talk about two of those, the Bloom's and the Solo. And I'm going to focus on those because there are two schools, one small rural Foundation to 12 government school in the far west of Victoria, where we took a group of PSTs for a few days, and they were a thinking school, a Bloom school. That's what they called themselves. The second school was a large private school with several campuses in the east of Victoria, and they were also Foundation to Year 12. And I went there to visit some pre-service teachers, and then I was invited to come back and take part in some professional development. Now, they called themselves a thinking school, a solo school. And this quote is from the principal of one of those schools, but it could have equally have been from the other. We don't teach standalone lessons in critical thinking. We introduce it at the beginning of the year, but then it becomes part of our shared language. The teachers use it over and over again in the context of all the lessons that they teach. So first I'll talk about the Bloom School, and hopefully it'll be just a quick refresher on the revised Bloom's taxonomy. And this particular image is taken from the Federation website in the clip section. And the lower order thinking is remember, understand, apply, and the higher order thinking is analyse, evaluate and create. And I'm expecting that you would have come across this before, perhaps. In this small Victorian rural school, as you come into the front office, you can see the Bloom's colourful charts. In the back of the staff room are the charts. In the science lab, in the back of every classroom, and even as you leave to go out, there's more Bloom's charts. In the foundation room, in the VCE room, and even in the gym are Bloom's charts. And the teachers and students are constantly using Bloom's words in their work and in their discussion. The students would say things like, well, we've described the situation, now let's analyse it. The PSTs and I noticed that the students ran the classes. The students would be at the board during the maths examples. The students would lead the discussion about the themes of a novel. The students observed and gave feedback on their peers and their coaching skills and their ball handling skills. There were checklists everywhere, public and private checklists. Talk about visible learning. The other school, the grammar school in the east of Victoria, were into solo. Now, you may not know about solo, so I'll spend a minute to talk about it. So, solo is structure of observed learning outcomes, first described by Biggs and Collins in 1982, and they are both Australian. And they talked about pre-structural, the students have no idea. Unistructural, they can do very simple things. Multistructural, they can do slightly more complicated things, perhaps several ways. And then relational, where everything is all linking together. And then extended abstract is where they get this new concept that they've just learnt and they can extend it in many different ways. Now, the example on the Federation website in the clips section is of a Lego. The children are asked the task of to build a plane with Lego, and the one task can be approached by many different children in different ways. They have no idea, they're perhaps starting to get used to the equipment, they're gathering their ideas together, and these children here can do the Lego plane, but only by the strict instructions. And these ones, that's a sort of a Star Wars sort of a plane, where they've extended the idea of making a plane and linking it in with other ideas that they already knew. They can explain the task in many different ways, which really spoke to me as a maths teacher. And Bloom's and Solo are two of the 42 frameworks. They happen to be the only two that are mentioned on the CLIP website for Federation University, and they're their focus for these two schools at each end of Victoria. Now, the Solo taxonomy is becoming more visual lately because Hattie thought it was pretty good, and he wrote a paper on the advantages of Solo over Bloom's in 2004. And he said things like, when we're talking about surface deep and constructed or conceptual understanding, they can be described using Biggs and Collins's Solo model, and he felt it had proved most valuable in our understanding of teaching and learning and assessment. Overall, Bloom's is really good for classifying tasks, and Solo is particularly good at classifying the students' responses to the tasks. Now, the grammar school in the east of Victoria was harder to get photos there, but this is from their website and from their school handbook. They're into visible learning and using Solo verbs to describe their displays, their learning intentions, and their success criteria. They will use Solo verbs in their displays and discussions. Now, I did manage to get hold of some of my pre-service teachers' work, and she's mentioning here about the learning intentions and success criteria, and she was asked to colour code the verbs in her success criteria: remember and recognise, choose and compose. So she highlighted those in her success criteria and colour coded them and matched them in with their colours of Solo. Now, this picture here is a grade 2 child's picture, and it's his vision of his own head, and he feels that he had this much understanding in his head and this much relational understanding and just a tiny bit of not understanding in his head, as he described it to our pre-service teacher. Now, both of the schools implemented these whole school approaches to thinking. Both schools had self and peer observations and checklists. Checklists of curriculum, explicit lists of teacher expectations, whole school PD. The PD that I attended at the Solo school was on the differentiated classroom based on the work of Tomlinson. Now, here's an example of a checklist. A couple of the items are: I tell my students what they are going to learn rather than what they are going to do. I avoid grade-only feedback. I ask open questions. So they're the sort of things that they are constantly reflecting on to make sure that they're catering for their whole school approach. Now I'll do just a couple of examples here. Start with a maths one because that's what I'm into. When we're differentiating and catering for our children, say I'm teaching about coins, I could give them pre-tests, I could give them different worksheets. This group of children have just the gold coins. These group of children have a mixture of coins. These children have to work out the change as well. That's a lot of work for the teacher, a lot of paper and a lot of time. Another way you could do it is by having an open task. And for example, I have 5 coins. How much money might I have? So this open task can be attempted at many different levels by the children. Level 1 children might just count up $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 coins and going up in complexity until year 11, maths method students could answer the question, and how do you know when you found them all? With your permutations and combinations involved. You could even extend this task to coins of a different country or design your own coins, as in this Pisa item. Do we need a quarter or a 25-cent piece like the Americans have? So this is an example of how one task can cater for higher order and lower order thinking. And if the children or the students are exposed to the constant vocab of and how can you extend that task, how can you make it higher order thinking, then they will do it. A science example now. Why does it get dark at night? One question can be answered many different ways. A unistructural student might answer it because the sun goes to the other side of the world, or because the earth is spinning. Right up to an extended abstract, the earth is spherical in shape and rotates about its north-south axes as it rotates, and so on. So we need to ask questions so that we're not holding our children back. Another example from sport, where the children are explicitly told the various aims. I can participate in a team. I can interact in a team and adapt to different roles. I can interact confidently with other team situations and make compromises. Wouldn't it be good if the children knew explicitly that this was what the aim was? Now, I said in my abstract for this talk that I would cater for all different ages. So, here is an example from University Dentistry School. This is a paper taken about using solo taxonomy in dental education. Describe the problem. What tests would you recommend? What is your opinion about the results? Now, my final image that I wanted to share with you was in the school in the West, the small rural school, pretty much in the desert. This is what the children will do at lunchtime of their own choice in their free time. I'd say this is a sign of a thinking school. And if you look carefully at the front down here in the middle, is that a Bloom's chart in their cubby house? I wonder. So I was asked to supply some prompts on what you might think about. How can you use these ideas in your setting? Do you think a whole school approach is appropriate or a variety of approaches? At one school I taught, there were many different approaches that were encouraged. We were given this book with many different approaches, and I chose Habits of the Mind. And I had these posters around my class, and I would point to them and discuss them, and the students would, and I'd have them for a theme of the day. Do you think each teacher should be able to adapt to their own content and style? And another question that I think might be worth thinking about, perhaps the longer term, do students need to master lower order thinking before they attempt higher order thinking?